Hi guys, George Eustice was pretty useless when he was sent on to Channel 4 to defend a bunch of policies that Rishi Sunak claimed that he was dropping, but were never policies in the first place. This is yet another attempt by the Tories to treat the public and potential voters like idiots. Pretend that there's a policy, claim that you're the one who's going to water it down or remove it altogether, and then do a victory lap. Bins and meat are two of the ones that are brought up in this interview, and George does a useless job of deflecting from Rishi Sunak's lying. Have a listen.
The weird thing about today was that Rishi Sunak claimed he'd cancelled a load of policies that I must have just been asleep for. I mean, when did they announce that we were all going to have 7 bins and that they were going to tax meat?
Well, there have been proposals from a number of reports. So there was a Henry Dimbleby report that said
Now, when did the government say it was going to do it?
The government hasn't, but the Climate Change Committee has. And so the government, and including in my time, was endlessly assailed by the Climate Change Committee to do things, some of which actually
Climate Change Committee is independent of government. Rishi Sunak claims that he cancelled government plans. Is he just making stuff up?
Well,
when was it ever a government plan?
Look, I think I can forgive all politicians a bit of rhetoric. There weren't government plans
so it was
for me.
Nonsense then, it was just rhetoric?
No, it is not nonsense. But
rhetoric is not true.
There have been many representations, and the Climate Change Committee, for instance, have been consistent in saying that we should either run some kind of advertising campaign to encourage people to eat less meat or indeed tax meat. And there's been lots of representations of that sort. It doesn't actually make sense because you could reduce meat consumption in this country, but because we measure emissions rather than consumption, you actually wouldn't cut your carbon emissions at all. You would simply be exporting more of that meat. So there are arguments that certain people have made.
But it was never government policy. It's just nonsense to say that he's cancelled a load of things that were going to happen. They were never going to happen.
It wasn't government policy.
Yeah.
No, that's right. And I'm not in my time anyway. I wasn't aware. But it is absolutely true that the government was relentlessly assailed by representations of this sort.
Right. Fine.
Yeah, right, fine. So it's not nonsense. It's not rhetoric. It's lies. That's what it is. And George Eustice doesn't do a very good job at defending that. Now, the committee is independent, as was pointed out here, and George Eustice accepted that. But the committee's job is to provide the government with advice. It's up to the government whether they take on that advice or reject it. But what Rishi Sunak has been doing here is lying, saying that we had these policies and now I've watered them down, or I have done a U-turn on these policies. But you can't do a U-turn unless you're driving in that direction, and he wasn't driving in that direction in the first place. Notice here that George Eustice tried to talk about, meat consumption or meat consumption being reduced or whatever. This is distracting. This is an attempt to distract the public from the lie. The lie was that there was a policy. There was no policy. There's advice that the independent committee gives to the government. And as I said, the government is within its power to accept that advice or reject it. And the advice can come in different forms. But the argument against that advice is between the politicians and the committee. It's not something that Rishi Sunak should be doing in the public sphere, in the sense that he shouldn't be saying that this is a policy when it's not. This is Rishi Sunak lying. Now, why is he lying? Because he's desperate. A few weeks ago, he had Stop the Boats Week. And then we had the Bibi Stockholm disaster. Then it was NHS Week. And nurses and doctors are on strike over pay and conditions. Then it was Schools Week, and schools are collapsing because of dodgy concrete. So now it's roll back net zero policies week. Why is he doing this? Well, a very small percentage of the British public want these net zero policies scrapped. And I think Sunak is listening to, or his advisors are telling him to listen to people like Nigel Farage or Talk TV or GB News, who keep banging on about how net zero is going to destroy the economy, or how fewer and fewer people support net zero, when the polls point to a greater number supporting net zero policies. So why and the people who already are against these net zero policies are likely to vote Tory anyway. So Sunak is pandering to a very small percentage of people, and he seems to be pandering to Nigel Farage and people like that. It's a failure. instead of actually embracing the policy, doubling down on it, being more ambitious, that could actually help him. But instead he's going in the opposite direction. Like Stop the Bolts and other policies like that. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.